Recorded.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of Parli Tilak Vidyalaya Association's M.L.Dahanukar College of Commerce, I, Ms. Pallavi Sawant, Assistant Professor from Department of Accountancy, welcome you all to this one-day international e-conference on evolving business perseverance and resilience to sail and thrive through pandemics and other global crises. This e-conference is jointly organized by the Internal Quality Assurance Cell and Department of Accountancy of PTVA's M.L.Dahanukar College of Commerce, affiliated to University of Mumbai, India. Pandemics and other global crises have affected the businesses, enterprises, and each and every sector in the world. The outbreak and scourge of diseases like plague, Spanish flu, COVID-19 have recorded great amount of human casualties and crippled the human life and businesses alike across the world. The pandemics, recessions, economic slowdowns are inevitable in their occurrence. However, the damage made by these global crises could be mitigated or averted by developing such innovative businesses and entrepreneurial models that would help evolving perseverance and resilience through robust business ecosystems. So, keeping in view this critical situation, with the inspiration and encouragement of our principal, Dr. Gyaneshwar Doke, we have organized this one-day international e-conference on evolving business perseverance and resilience to sail and thrive through pandemics and other global crises, which will help to have a common platform for academicians, researchers, students, industry personnel, and all those who are willing to take the challenges of the uncertainty of the future in the offing head-on and strive to create dynamic models of businesses. I may now call upon the convener of the conference, Mr. Munish Savi, to speak a few words. Over to you, sir.
Yeah, good morning, one and all, and good evening. Being convener, I really feel proud and privileged to be the part of this international conference. Department of Accountancy is one of the important departments of our college, and we have always tried to bridge the gap between industry and education by conducting various webinars, workshops, field visits, guest lectures, and so on. This time we have went ahead by organizing an international conference to help accommodations, researchers, students, and also the industry personnel in expanding their exposure of knowledge. Today, we have experts from different fields like finance, accounts and finance to be very specific, economics, management, and law. Scholarly insights of each eminent personalities would surely give us hope, direction, and prepare us with additional challenges thrown by this unprecedented situation. I'm certain with their vast experience and knowledge, our audience, both learners and the professionals, would have a lot of things to take away as a learning outcome. I wish all the best to the participants for a very enriching and rewarding experience. Thank you. Over to Pallavi ma'am.
Thank you so much, sir, for facilitating the task of our organizing committee as a convener and also throwing light on the making of this conference. I may now request our beloved principal, Dr. Gyaneshwar Doke, to address our participants. Over to you, sir.
Good morning and good evening to all the participants, all honorable guests, John Richardson, Dr. Sanika Ramanaike, Priya Patil, and our own CA Mukund Chitale. I welcome all of you on behalf of Parliamentary Vidyalaya Association and M.L.Dahanukar College of Commerce, run by Parliamentary Vidyalaya Association. Parliamentary Vidyalaya Association is an educational body established in 1920 to commemorate Lokmanya Bal Gangadhar Tilak. We have completed 100 years in last June. In fact, we were to have very big function celebration of centenary year, but due to pandemic, we couldn't have a function in a physical mode, though we had so many activities on online mode. This educational institution is now more than 100-year old. It started with 4 students in Marathi medium school. Now it has grown up with many schools, English medium, Marathi, that is vernacular medium of Maharashtra. Then we have CBS, ICSE school. Later on, management established 4 colleges. One of them is M.L.Dahanukar College. Next to M.L.Dahanukar College, there is a Sathe College. And we have another college at Mulund, which is a Mulund Commerce College, and one management institute. All these colleges deliver education from junior KG till PhD degrees. At Dahanukar, we have different courses, but majority of them are related to commerce. So we run 7 to 8 courses in commerce, BMS, banking and finance, accountancy, insurance, financial markets, regular BCom course. And in addition to that, we have some courses of information technology and mass media. The college is having more than 5,200 students, and this college is also more than 60-year-old. So I am privileged to welcome all of you on behalf of my governing body, Parliamentary Vidyalaya Association, staff of my college, staff of M.L.Dahanukar College of Commerce, and all my colleagues. This type of conferences is need of the day. We had one in last semester before Diwali, because our Diwali breaks, our semester breaks before Diwali and after Diwali. So before Diwali break, we had one conference. After Diwali, we have another conference. As rightly in the casual discussion, somebody said, because of pandemic, we could have this type of international conference. We could access the guest, call the guest on virtual or online mode. I welcome all of you once again for this international multidisciplinary conference and congratulate for successful beginning to entire team of Munesh Save, our Department of Accountancy, and all his colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for your inspiring words as always. Dear all, let us now move ahead and get ourselves briefed about our esteemed speakers for the day. Our first resource person of the day is Dr. Sanika Sulochni Ramnaike, who holds a PhD in economics and is a senior lecturer from Department of Social Statistics, Faculty of Social Sciences, University of Kelnia, Sri Lanka. She is certified for her proficiency in startup from Gyeonggi University, South Korea, and she has completed many other certified courses such as Advancing the Digital Economy for Sustainable Growth in Asia, Introduction to Sustainable Development in Asia and the Pacific, and so on. She had also worked as a senior research officer in Hector Kobekadua Agrarian Research and Training Institute, Colombo, Sri Lanka, and also as a postdoctoral researcher for International Development Research Center Fellowship hosted at Indira Gandhi Institute of Development Research, Mumbai, and also at Seoul National University and Inha University, South Korea. Madam has been awarded for her par excellence. She has been awarded with a Vice Chancellor Award for securing first place in the Outstanding Early Career Researcher organized by the University of Kelnia, Sri Lanka, and also with Senate honors for her paper titled The Macroeconomics for Gender Equality. Besides this, Madam has an array of papers, books, and chapters published in her name. She has been invited as a resource person for many international and national academic invitations. With such a versatile personality, Madam is indeed a real source of inspiration, knowledge, and talent, and it is a privilege to have Dr. Sanika Sulochni Ramnaike amongst us as one of the eminent resource persons. I welcome you, Madam, on the panel. Now, I will request my colleague, Dr. Sahifa Mazgaonkar, to introduce our second esteemed speaker for the day. Over to you, Madam.
Thank you, Ms. Pallavi. It's a privilege to be welcoming our next resource person, Mr. John Richardson. Mr. Richardson is Toronto-based American and Canadian lawyer. With a career spanning over 38 years, Mr. Richardson has done several roles as an entrepreneur, educator, lawyer, reputed writer, and blogger. He founded, owned, and successfully managed an education company for 30 years, helping thousands of students pursue postgraduate professional education. He is an accomplished global public speaker engaging in issues relating to American citizenship. Mr. Richardson wrote his first book in 1980s and then continued writing number of books related to professional education. He holds a BA from University of Toronto and LLB from Queen's University in Canada. He is a member of New York, Massachusetts, and Ontario bars. Mr. Richardson currently works in the area of investment migration, pronunciation of citizenship, green card expatriation, and Canadian immigration. He is passionate about civil liberties, education, outdoors, reading, cycling, skiing, sports, and traveling. I must say that Mr. John Richardson is truly a multifaceted personality, and we are honored to have the opportunity to learn from his insight during this course of this panel discussion. Thank you. Over to you, Ms. Pallavi.
Thank you, Dr. Sahifa. I will now request my colleague, Mr. Samrat Gangurde, to introduce our third esteemed speaker for the day. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Pallavi ma'am. Good morning, everyone. I, Samrat Gangurde, feel privileged to introduce the moderator for our panel discussion, Ms. Priya Patil Esquire. Ms. Priya Patil has more than 20 years experience in building, operating, and leading businesses in financial services and mining in Canada, the US, and India. Ms. Priya has held governance, senior strategy, operations, and corporate development roles. She has served as Chief Legal Officer of a multi-mine zinc copper producer operating company in multiple countries. She was Global Head of Diversified Industries at Toronto Stock Exchange, Managing Director and Head of Investment of Banking at two national investment banks, and has an attorney in Canada and Palo Alto, California. Ms. Priya also serves as an independent corporate director and audit compensation committee chair of public natural resources companies listed on the TSX and the AIM exchange of the LSE. She was chosen as an Canada Board Diversity Council 2017, Diversity 50 honoree, and Women in Capital Markets Board Ready inductee. Ms. Priya is passionate about capital markets, education, environment, and economic development. She is a member of the California and Ontario bars, holds her JD from the University of Ottawa, and BSc Statistics and Computer Sciences from the University of Bombay. She earned her ICD-B in Corporate Governance from Rotman School of Management of the University of Toronto. In short, friends, we are blessed to have amongst us one of the stalwarts from industry with a robust academic and research background in the form of Ms. Priya Patil. Madam, I welcome you for the panel session. Over to you, Pallavi.
Thank you so much, Samrat sir. Now I'll request my colleague, Dr. Siddhi Roy, to introduce our fourth speaker for the day. Over to you, madam.
Thank you, Pallavi ma'am. Hello, everyone. It gives me immense pleasure to introduce C.A. Mukund Chitle. Sir is one of the directors of Palli Tilak Vidyalaya Association, and has been actively guiding and mentoring us over the years. He was the member of Central Council of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India, ICAI. He was also elected as Vice President and President of ICAI. Sir was the Director of ICAI Accounting Research Foundation. He has been the Managing Partner of Mukund and Chitle and Company Chartered Accountants for more than 50 years, and he holds vast experience in advising companies and providing them with financial solutions. Mr. Chitle is widely regarded as an expert in accounting and auditing matters in not only India but also abroad. Sir has traveled extensively to more than 15 countries and has been more than 1,000 lectures on a variety of topics at both national and international fronts. Sir has presented research papers and given lectures at various seminars and conferences held at national and international levels on the subjects of accountancy, auditing, corporate governance, banking, quality controls, and various other subjects. His articles, papers are published in professional journals and newspapers on various subjects. Mr. Chitle has also been a member of the International Auditing Practices Committee of the International Federation of Accountants. He was the chairman of National Advisory Committee on Accounting Standards appointed by the Ministry of Corporate Affairs. Sir has been a member of various governing council and advisory board of RBI, Central Vigilance Commission, SEBI, IRDA, and Ministry of Corporate Affairs. He has been erstwhile chairman of Principal PNB Asset Management Company Private Limited and erstwhile trusteeship assignments of SBI Mutual Fund. He is presently independent director of 9 companies and erstwhile independent director of 18 companies. To name a few companies such as Larsen & Toubro Limited, Oil and Natural Gas Corporation Limited, Larsen & Toubro Infotech Limited, Atul Limited, etc. This is just a brief glimpse of Sir's accolades and achievements. We welcome you, Sir, for the panel discussion session. Thank you. Over to you, Pallavi ma'am.
Thank you, Dr. Siddhi. Having abreast ourselves with the profile of our esteemed panel of speakers for the plenary session, may I have the privilege of inviting Ms. Priya to moderate the session and take the discussion further. Also, I request all the 3 speakers to join the panel formally.
Good morning to all of you, except John. Good evening to you, John. It's our pleasure to be a part of this very important discussion that we are about to hold. I'm also pleased that our panel has a wide variety of experiences and insights. So it's going to be an enriching experience for all of our audiences. We have a fairly robust agenda here. So I'm not going to waste much time sort of talking about inane things. So without further ado, I would like to get into our agenda so that we can move the discussion further. This pandemic has forced us to look back to see how we could handle this pandemic, how we can come out of it better than when we went into it. So clearly, we're not going to look into our history thousands of years, but I think it's probably worth it to look about at least 100 years, a little over 100 years, starting from Spanish flu. Now, in the last 100 years, or little over 100 years, we've had 2 major health crises. One was the Spanish flu, and now the COVID. But we've had many economic crises throughout that time, starting with the Great Depression, the oil embargo issues, the big stock market crash of the 80s, the dot-com bust, the recession of the 2008, and now we have both a health crisis and economic crisis. So against that background, I'm going to reach out to Mr. Richardson to see if he might have some lessons that we've learned from all of these crises over the years that he can share with us.
Well, thank you for that, Priya. That's certainly a small question. I think that there actually is one clear answer, and that is that they always end. They always end. This will end in the same way that everything else has ended. And the important thing is to realize that the greatest mistake is to, I think, resist change, to try to run your life, your activities as though you wish things were not going to change. And all of these crises, although everybody gets through them, they sort of shift people in the world relationally to one another, businesses to one another. And what's important here, I've noticed that one of the questions had to do with sort of the focus on survival versus transformation. I think it was Darwin who said that it's not the strongest who survive, it's not the smartest who survive. It's the people who are the most adaptable who survive. So during these periods of times, it's, I think, important to realize that whatever bad things are going on will end. See these restructurings as opportunities to come out better, for businesses to not act defensively or individuals to not act defensively, but see the opportunity in restructuring, and basically to invest in their ability to continually change, to relearn, and to instill the confidence in themselves as individuals, their families, their institutions, their countries, and frankly, as responsible citizens of the world, to adapt and come out stronger.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Mr. Richardson. And I guess if I might add, there will be other crises. They always come. And this is going to teach us how to handle the future crisis. I hope it's not soon, but they will be there. It's a fact of life. Talking about the crisis, I think we just talked about opportunities. Now, every crisis, every negative situation has, clearly the negative aspect of that, but also opportunity side of it. And I think, as John said also earlier, that you need to look at future and the opportunities and transform yourself to better yourself. So with that in mind, I would like to reach out to Dr. Ramanayake to see how do we identify opportunities in these kind of crisis situations? And then I'll come to you, Mr. Chitle, also. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Priya. Actually, this kind of pandemic or the crisis create so much of opportunities for all the nations, not only for the developed or developing countries. I would like to give some selected opportunities during this pandemic. One is the health sector. So they have created a bunch of opportunities to the society, creating especially the new vaccination and finding new medicine for this kind of pandemic. And also a lot of opportunities created different kind of jobs, especially like a testing, like a therapist and also telemedicine. These kind of a lot of opportunities are created, and also in the health sector, the opportunities created in the innovation sector as well. So this COVID pandemic boosting the innovation, and the interesting thing is the innovation makes within a short time period. Usually innovation takes some long time, but this kind of pandemic led innovation within a very short time period. So that is a very important opportunity created. For example, we found the vaccination within 6 months or some short period, and also the medicine for the newly found virus. And also you can see like drone technology used for delivery medicine around the world a lot during this pandemic. So these kind of opportunities created a lot of new jobs for the people. As a good example, I would like to mention that zipline used in USA. So they have delivered 100,000 medicine products using the small kind of, airplane or kind of drones. So, so these kind of new opportunities created this pandemic in the health sector. At the same time, I would like to mention that acceleration happened, which is a rapid adoption of new technologies. I would like to share my figure number 1. Mr. Munesh, could you please share figure number 1? I would like to get one example from South Korea. Yeah, you can see this figure. It shows the kind of biggest crisis impacted in South Korea, especially the Asian finance IMF crisis in 1997 and also 2008 financial crisis. Global financial crisis heavily affected on South Korea and also many other countries, not only South Korea, and also 2015 MERS virus. So can you see this figure? This is a number of patent application. So after this kind of huge pandemic, the lot of innovations happened till the next crisis. So that is very important pattern we can identify. So if you extended this figure into the 2019 to 2020, we can see again a huge increasement of this kind of new technological innovations in diverse areas. Okay. At the same time, I would like to mention the new opportunities created in the food industry. Of course, we all know a lot of businesses declined and they had a lot of issues during the pandemic, but created a lot of opportunities in the restaurant and business who took the risk. Especially like, for example, creating takeaway opportunities in the restaurant field and boxes of fine dining or vegan boxes. These kind of very new opportunities are opened the door for these kind of business during this pandemic. Also, online food delivery method. Has rapid expansion. If we take the statistic in 2024, $182 billion increased in the food delivery industry. And also, if we take the opportunities in the education sector, as we all can see, and it is very practical now, increase in e-learning and online education. That is created a massive opportunities in every country. So in the statistic, like in 2019 to 2026, $370 billion increased the value of online education in the market. So these are a lot of opportunities. I have selected few of opportunities to discuss here today. Thank you.
Thanks. Mr. Chitle, I would like to reach out to you as well to share your insights on what kind of opportunity have you seen and how do people recognize them?
Yeah. Firstly, I think I'm happy to be a part of this panel discussion completely in a different forum as compared to what I've been used to. Let me take this to a slightly different philosophical kind of an approach to begin with. All of us work in different fields and work in different environments. Everyone is used to work in a normal situation. When a pandemic comes, I think all the basis gets vitiated. We are not used to this kind of situation. So the turmoil starts. The basic issue is why in business one does a business and what is the resilience and what is perseverance. From that angle, I recollect a quote by Arya Chanakya, and that's where I'll begin with. Arya Chanakya states that Sukhasya moolam dharmaha, dharmasya moolam artha, arthasya moolam rajyam, rajya moolam indriya jayaha. Connecting to this topic, happiness is the beginning point for everything, whether in business, education, or human life. I think that's what we normally desire to have. And that's where Arya Chanakya says that dharma is the nucleus of happiness. Meaning thereby that whatever are your activities, if you're in business, do the business properly. If you're in education, do it properly. So that's the dharma. So he says that's the basis of happiness. Now, in many cases, the pandemic unshackled everything. It destabilized whatever activities we're doing, and we had to think of again as to how to go back to that kind of an activity. I think that's the basic opportunity. The next thing which we have stated is that the core of dharma is wealth or artha. Now, very rarely people accept that to be a reality, but artha, that is the money or wealth, is taken as the core of dharma. That means you need that kind of a money to follow your activities in complete sense. And I think that's where the surveillance of business or recoupment of business was extremely important. And then it says the stability of the state is the precondition for artha. And here the state can be the ruler, the government, or whatever it is. That means in case that is not stable, the monetary powers or the artha, and I think we take it today, the Ukraine and the Russia, there's no reason to comment on that, but that's a very valid point. So is the stability is the most important. And finally, the primary duty of the rulers is to be in command over senses and emotions. So I think in the pandemic, it was stated that those governments which were able to understand the needs of the society for which they were ruling could come up in the situation faster. Those who just allowed things to evaporate could not do it faster. And in that angle, I would look at the opportunities. I think those of us who were able to go into our own activities in a different fashion, understand the needs, and come up to that situation could come up in a much bigger way. When we say retail business, when we say wholesale business, when we say education, these are sectors in which we are talking. But the fundamental point is, did we show the willingness and the resilience or the capability to stand up to the problems and find out our own solutions? And I think this pandemic forced us to convert that challenge into opportunity. And I think that's how I would look at this pandemic, as a God-given push to all of us to push ourselves to our better limits in the respective areas. That's it.
Thank you. I love Chanakya Niti, actually. I'm glad actually you visited that. It was thousands of years ago, still valid. But also, necessity is the mother of invention. We talked about innovation, and a lot of new businesses are are born and will be born, coming out of this pandemic. Developed nations and developing nations, there is a bit of a chasm between the two worlds. I am not able to personally, comment much on the opportunities which exist in the developing nations right now. Although I'm from India, I haven't been there in the last couple of years, but I do go there, quite often. I would like, Mr. Chitle, probably for you to comment on what kind of opportunities are you seeing in developing nations?
See, when we say developing nations, I think I'm from India, so let me start with that. But there'll be many other countries also which happen to be in a similar category. What has happened is, when we say developing nations, it is normally presumed that the inequality between the incomes of population is slightly more than what it should be. Secondly, the rulers or the government is not necessarily providing the social security as one is expecting them to be. I think that could be the starting point. And therefore, when one looks at issues or problems or opportunities arising out of pandemic, those who were able to sustain themselves for a longer period because of what they had could carry on for some period. But there were many people who could not sustain themselves. So they had to move out and start doing some activity. Now that activity pushed everyone to find out what is the skill because it's not only knowledge, it's the knowledge and the skill which push them to start small activities which were useful to the surrounding areas. You know, there is a lot of population which may not be easily movable. So they had to stay in whatever area they are, but serve the people around. So very small things like preparing tiffins and supplying to others became an activity at the very smallest level. With the net connections being easily available and with the penetration of mobile into the entire sectors of developing nations, I think facilities of net and doing inventions on that really brought up a lot of new technical startups. That's the other kind of thing which has started. The technical startups inventing, those who could do that have expanded in a big way. I think that travel and tourism suffered heavily because the pandemic pushed people not to move out. Now, once the travel and tourism pushed people, those who had those skills had to adapt to, as was mentioned earlier, moving into a food business and delivery to various kinds of people. So I think anyone who had some kind of a skill had to think of what is the other utility that you can do out of what you possess. And I think in economics, in the beginning, we are always told the factors of production, main, machine, and material. So anyone who had the main, naturally everyone has got the main power. So what main, and of course, naturally women. So that power of doing something has been utilized. And I think to that extent, the developing nations, in fact, fastly utilize those powers to serve the people around in a quick manner. Machine and money may or may not be available, but I think the use of resources pushed people to earn the money, out of which came the other kinds of production. In larger industries, I think the manpower was a big issue. The large companies, the people employed could not come to the office, and there were issues arising out of that situation. So they were forced to adapt themselves to different situations and so on and so forth. So I think the challenges were large, and the first wave, the second wave, and hopefully not the third wave has brought it up and down in a much bigger fashion. But I think by and large, we have been able to sustain ourselves through the period through innovations and utilization of our own skills in whatever angle one could do. Thank you.
You know, I actually really like that one point, and that is it has forced people to see how they could expand their skills, the application of their skills in a different way to earn a living. You know, so that has been a very positive outcome of this. Dr. Ramanake, do you want to add something to that?
Yeah, actually, this pandemic created so much of opportunities, particularly for the developing countries. So as Mr. Chitle mentioned, the developing countries, they're unable to take the opportunities. Of course, they have skills, but they don't know how to manage. So that's why most of the developing countries, they can achieve kind of economic growth for a short time, but it's not going for a long time. It's not into the sustaining level. So within a short time period, they are achieving a growth, but they have declined because of they don't have intensive ability to maintain that achieved growth. So, China is doing well now. In terms of so many manufacturing industry and also the service sector. Korea and Taiwan is the good example for sustaining growth, but we are unable. One reason is we are all into the labor-intensive industries and also the agriculture sector. So I would like to propose for the developing countries to take this opportunity to take one step forward. For example, a lot of labor-intensive industries are moving out of China now, especially the American companies. So they are trying to invest in like Mexico or the Central America. So a lot of developing countries around this area can take this opportunity to provide the facilities for take these kind of investment and business and take the advantage of that. Not only USA and also Chinese companies are moving to the developing nations to get the low skilled labor for a cheap wages. So I think if the developing countries can create the surface to attract a lot of investment capital, so they can earn a lot of money, because most of the developing countries are facing the lack of dollars to invest in the capital investment. And another one, this pandemic created so much of opportunities for the developing countries in the easy access. So I want them to take these easy access to attract a lot of knowledge. Knowledge capital is very important for them. And that is one of the main thing they are lacking of. So taking this easy access advantage to invest more on knowledge capital and also invest more on R&D intensity. So if they can maintain this, I think they are able to doing well, maybe after a couple of years later.
Thank you for that. I'm glad you mentioned manufacturing, because there is a trend towards either nearshoring or onshoring or finding alternatives to China. Right now, it's become a concentration risk for a lot of companies and a lot of other issues. So I'm glad you mentioned that as well. Moving on, I think earlier, John very briefly talked about survival and transformation. Anytime there are new opportunities, clearly you cannot continue to do things the way you did before the crisis hit. There have to be some changes, and there usually are. So would John, would you like to comment on whether companies how they could transform, in order to survive and thrive?
Well, I think that the first point, I think, for companies surviving, whether it's a pandemic or not, or to put it another way, remaining competitive, is that they cannot operate primarily defensively. They have to, every single day, have to imagine that they're starting out again, because that is the mindset that will focus them on actually seeing what the new opportunities are. And I have seen in my lifetime so many individuals and so many companies who have done very, very well. And once they reach a certain level of achievement, which is generally associated with prosperity, what they do is a disproportionate amount of their focus turns into trying to maintain the conditions, the structural conditions that allow them to do well. And much of that is trying to protect themselves from competition. Competition is a fact of life forever. And the important thing is to always be moving forward with that mindset, because otherwise they won't be able to see the opportunities, much less create them. And I think that from the point of view of, I've always been a small business person, so it's hard for me to speak from the perspective of large companies, although I would have to think that it's simply the same problems magnified 1,000%. I think that individuals, companies, governments, education sector, what have you, have to invest in nourishing the imagination, the ability to see opportunity, positive outlook, and most important in terms of educational goals, investing in the ability to continually relearn. In other words, every skill that you get, I think, should never be considered to be an end in itself, but rather a tool to learn something else in sort of the continual state of evolution that we all have to live in.
Thank you. Would you like to add anything to that, Dr. Ramanayake or Mr. Chitle?
Yeah, just Chitle here. Just one thought.
Yeah.
See, I think this has pushed people to find out their best. And sometimes if you look at it in a different fashion, and that's what I recollect the quote of Peter Drucker, that the business grows to the extent the top management allows it to grow. The bottleneck, after all, is at the neck of the bottle. So many of us who keep on thinking that the situation doesn't permit me to grow, or the environment of the pandemic has pushed me down, may have to rethink as to what is it that I'm doing to make the situation different. Can I do something differently? And I think John rightly pointed out, upskilling yourself, changing your own skills, relooking at the situations is what one looks at. So while one talks about the business, I think nothing short of self being a business unit, if you think of that way, then one keeps on thinking, which is the area in which I can improve upon myself. And I think the entire success of any business lies in how the top people make them move. And I think those businesses where the top management push them to the finishing touch have been able to survive themselves. Others are finding it difficult to move ahead. I think that's a good lesson arising out of this pandemic in a much open way. Thank you.
So in other words, don't be a sitting duck. Keep on moving. Excellent. Now, Dr. Ramnaike, this is more of a little bit of an economics question, and I didn't see your name there. But anyway, so I wonder whether you might like to sort of say something about value creation
Yeah.
to survive and prosper.
Yes, actually, in terms of agriculture sector, a lot of developing countries are into it. So the creation of new values into the particular sector can survive them in long time, in a short way.
Yeah, in other words, whatever that you're doing, there has to be a customer at the other end. There's no point in having all your wares and nobody wants it. So make it valuable for others, your customers, and you'll be fine. Moving on, I think we're just going to go, like we've so far talked about general, principles, etc. But I want to probably focus a little bit on SME sector now. And I think, Mr. Chitle, you had, indicated that, that's something you would like to talk about. So how do companies or how do people or SMEs cope up in these kind of situations, in these kind of, trying situations?
Yeah, see, typically in SMEs, if you look at, and of course, depending upon the country, the definition of SME would change. What is called as small may be different. So this is more of a general kind of an understanding. But generally, SMEs are run by people who are technocrats, who have expertise on one line, and they create their own businesses. They keep on doing as much work as possible by self. Some of them create good organizations. Some of them do not create good organizations, and so on and so forth. I think before pandemic, they could run their own situations in whatever way they were running. But pandemic pushed them to the wall. In a sense, if he's a technical person, expert in manufacturing, he found that the people in the sales time are not present at all. The people in the finance people are not present at all. So he gets into difficulty. So when I say SMEs, I would say that they can be of different types, very small, medium size and businesses. So first lesson that they were pushed to do is that which is the area in which their self skill was very good, but the supporting skills of others who were supporting that main person were either wanting or that could not be available. So I think that was the biggest trouble for most of the SMEs. And in the short term, wherever they could rearrange their own resources or they could hire new resources, they could come up. Otherwise, their survival itself was a big difficulty. I think that's the first difficulty for SMEs, because many of them did not have large number of employees, etc. Look at the second category, those who had employees and those who are at the working level. If they could not be sustained, naturally the working population moved away to their own state, own villages, and the entire production came to a halt. So the SME had to learn to support their own workers, even though that may not be profitable venture at that given point of time. So I think those SMEs which could support their own workers to sustain, even though there is no profit or no income, have been able to sustain over a period. Now this required some slightly medium to long-term thinking. Those who could do that, I think, would survive well. Others suffered in the process. The third was the money circulation. Naturally, nobody was paying anybody. And when the money is not coming, the artha not being around, running a business was extremely difficult. So those who had the power to sustain themselves through the difficulty could sustain it. And that's where the banking system was really useful. And I think countries where the banking system supported the SMEs have been able to sustain themselves for a longer period. Countries where the banking system could not support SMEs, the SMEs would suffer heavily. And I think when we look at SMEs, of course, the illustrations can be many. I'm just trying to conceptualize them. That the illustrations can be many, but the point is the resource or the skill which was lacking, what was the best way in which that resource could be supplemented or resource could be sustained even though the owner himself was not making money. I think these are the kind of SMEs who could sustain themselves through the pandemic period. But those who took short-term policy of saying, look, if I'm not earning money, I'm not going to support my assistant, suffered naturally. So that also brought out how the value creation that you talked about earlier is so important. The value creation is not only for the promoter. The value creation is not only for the owner. The value creation is for everyone who is working around you. And I think those SMEs who could create value even for their own assistants, I think I see in lifetime, in the actual situation, they could sustain themselves better as compared to somebody else. Thank you.
Yeah, that goodwill towards all the stakeholders, so during difficult times, we had governments here throw a lot of money at people and companies and such, but wherever that wasn't available, the entrepreneurs had to actually be that benefactor, of the people that work for them. Would you like to say anything about that, Dr. Ramanayake, or?
Actually, in terms of SMEs, who did some different things, not the usual thing, who can create something different, they would able to, sustain. For example, during this pandemic, only the grocery stores and pharmaceutical shops survived. And few restaurants who took some changes, applying delivery methods and some kind of modification could survive. All of the SMEs had trouble, a lot of job losses in that field. So I believe that not path following, we would like to follow the path. If someone is doing things and we would like to follow. But that is not important. I think if you can make something new, path creating, or taking detours, or trying to get some risk, they could survive in this kind of pandemic. So I would like to add something like, most of the SMEs are surrounded by the tourism sector. So tourism sector is very fragile. If you can see the figure number 2, if you can show, like we had a lot of a pandemic during centuries and even now, or a lot of crises. So the tourism inflow is declining heavily. Figure number 2. Yeah, figure number 2. Not this one, actually, the next one. Yeah, this one. So this is the tourism, impact, like arrivals. So you can see a lot of pandemic decline the tourism. So even now, tourist inflow decline into zero because of the lockdown condition in many countries. So a lot of SMEs who are, attract to these tourism industry had a bunch of crises with no money, and they even can't wake up without any financial assistance. So moving to, I want them to think something new, not the focusing on this kind of fragile industry, because we can see and we can learn the lesson from this kind of trend.
Excellent. Mr. Chidley, you talked about how some of the SMEs have, and different types of SMEs have been able to cope in this kind of situation. Are there any other alternatives? For example, has some pooling of resources has happened? The banking system, if it wasn't supporting the SMEs, and the SMEs didn't have a lot of money to support all of its employees, it's a problem. Unless the government steps in, to make sure that the SMEs survive, and then, you have an issue. Have you seen SMEs pooling their resources to sort of, help each other survive or consolidate or anything like that?
Yeah, actually, when we say SMEs, sometimes it could be service providers, it could be manufacturers, it could be retailers, any kind of situation. So
Right.
I think those who could adapt themselves to the changing situations, I think they have been able to survive. We have lots of small retail shops. Now, the shops are practically closed when the moving out was not allowed. But those shop owners who could start delivery function, I think they could survive. Those shop owners who could come together and say, look, collectively we'll offer a solution, they could survive. So in a way, I think those people who showed the willingness to adapt themselves to the new situation, and the illustrations can be different. But frankly, there are some people, I think, as John initially pointed out, that after a point of time, people feel that, look, now they have reached a great saturation point and there is nothing further to think. I think those kind of people always would suffer. So even in SMEs, I think those who thought that, look, they must have the fighting spirit and do something different, those have been able to come out, find out their own solutions. But those who could not think that way, I think could not do it. The half the success lies in thinking process as to what you can do differently. And I think once the thinking pushes the person to do differently, automatically SMEs also start moving. And that thinking process, if the person is able to imbibe into the people working with him, I think that makes a lot of difference. When somebody looks at people working with you as only employee and something like this, it creates a trouble. But if you're able to create that kind of a self-motivated environment amongst your people, even in pandemic, we have seen those businesses could come together, find out a collective solution, and move out of the situation. So I think the trouble lies in the thinking process about, can you think differently? Can you adapt yourself to the challenge and convert it into an opportunity? If yes, I think whether SME or otherwise, they have been able to sustain themselves. Thank you.
So it's corporate culture, I mean, so, and that starts at the top, and that's not something that should be an ongoing process throughout the life of a company.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. Now, any crisis in the world, can have cascading impact on many aspects of the economy, people, the corporate work, countries, etc. Clearly, we don't have enough time to address every impact, but we've chosen a few headings here. One of them is purchasing power. Now, a lot of countries, it's like I can talk about, Western countries. I mean, they printed money like, there was no tomorrow. And, so all of a sudden the whole system is flooded with so much monetary, stimulus that everything became more expensive. I don't know how, would you like to maybe I'll start with Dr. Ramanayak and then, move to, if anybody wants to comment further on that. How has it affected the purchasing power, both individuals and corporates?
Yeah, actually, during this pandemic, the purchasing power or consumer spending stopped for a while all around the world. So I am from Sri Lanka is facing a huge trouble these days because of Sri Lanka don't have money to buy even fuel. no gasoline, no milk powder, or people are shouting against the government, and high inflation rate, especially in the food, inflation is around 20% within a year. So people into a huge crisis because of this purchasing power. One thing is that in terms of Sri Lankan government, we don't have dollars to we don't have dollar savings in the government, so we can't buy fuel from the we can't import necessary goods from abroad. So now we are taking debt and debt and debt. So now we are asking money from India, and we are begging money and fuel to, even the electricity is cutting down 5 hours every day now. So that is a massive problem with this kind of purchasing power increase. I think this is not actually impacting all countries, but this is hugely impacting Sri Lanka. But some countries, they are able to manage, like Bangladesh. Bangladesh is doing well even during the pandemic, because they knew how to manage with their apparel industry, textile and clothing. And also many other developing countries, they could overcome this purchasing power crisis. But actually countries with I want to mention that especially related to governments and the political leadership. The leadership is, I can't mention, and sometimes I can't talk. It's full of corruption in the Sri Lankan government. Of course, that is the reality. So inflation happened and people are suffering, and there is no any other solution, and we are getting debt by debt, especially from China. We are in the middle of the crisis between China and US. Also, our big brother is beside us, like India. So it is actually mess now in Sri Lanka. So this is a one good example for the pandemic impact in the purchasing power.
So, it looks like Bangladesh, an exports-oriented country. And, it's funny enough, like, as I said, here the government's printed too much money, like so much money. They flooded, the markets with liquidity. And as a result, people were shopping left, right, and center, So clearly, and clothes were one of the things. So countries like Bangladesh could export, and, things got bought here and they got the foreign exchange. Did India also do that? Like, was the they flooded the country with liquidity?
No, I think, let me leave out political comments, but I think as a country, we have been able to manage ourselves properly, because when we only print money, the inflation is a natural consequence. I'm also in banking to some extent, and therefore I can say this very clearly, that people or countries which are able to manage their productions and services creation in a proper fashion are able to balance their money supply and creation of wealth or products or services in a proper fashion. But where people become habituated to getting freebies, that means the government will keep on supplying everything free of money. There is some kind of freebies, which the word I may use. And when people start using or liking this beyond a point, I think that's where the trouble really starts. So these are the habits which I think governments have to control. If the government encourages freebies to be distributed to people, either because of elections or whatever conditions one may put it, as a country, the country is bound to suffer. And I think that's a natural corollary. But that's where the economics and politics, I think, clash with each other. Many times, good economics is not necessarily good politics. Now, one has to find out a good balance between a good politics and good economics. And I would say, without any political color to this, that so far we have been able to manage it in a reasonably good fashion. The inflation would be there. Within the country, will keep on shouting about it. But I think it has been at a manageable level in spite of the pandemic and the current situation. The reason being, people have been resilient. People have been able to sustain themselves People have been able to create their own environment in which they create values, they create goods, they create services. I think that's the fundamental reason as to why a country can sustain itself in spite of these challenges. So I think the more credit goes to, of course, the government, but I think it's a 50-50. The people also have been supporting those kind of situations. And I think that's where we stand today. Thank you.
I think it's just being financially savvy, the habits of people. And I'm glad to hear that, the country has done quite well. Moving on, we talked earlier about wealth gaps. When you talked about developing nations and developed nations. Now we're seeing a lot of wealth gap also here, the developed nations. So John, would you like to comment on inequalities that we're seeing in the society right now? We can talk about American experience. You can talk about Canadian experience if you want.
Sure. Well, I think that the inequality is probably a worldwide experience. I'm a conservative sort of by disposition, and I agree with all the comments here about, responsible spending and saving and, management of the economy and that sort of thing. But all of this does exist within a certain political framework. And one of the problems with democracies is that sooner or later, if you're not careful, you get more people who essentially vote for a living than work for a living. And that is certainly true in North America at the present time. Perhaps not true in Sri Lanka or India, but definitely true in North America, which is, of course, the part of the world that I clearly know best. And the discrepancies in wealth were great before the pandemic, but there is no question that has been greatly exacerbated in two ways. One is just the sheer redistribution of wealth to people whose businesses were sort of more modern, internet-based. Delivery, for example, or ordering online. Those very basic things. And the pandemic resulted in an awful lot of people who were what I would say 20th century people, as opposed to 21st century people, really being out of work and that. And I think that the wealth, the discrepancy in wealth is so great now in North America that governments are openly talking about significant wealth taxes, for the first time in my lifetime, which is basically just, transferring the wealth of one group to another. And I do not think that countries can remain stable for very long with these kinds of discrepancies. We're seeing, I think, a complete obliteration of the middle class in Canada and the United States. And, one might say, well, so what? The reality is that economies operate based on, a flow and exchange of money, purchasing, and things like that. And, when you've got a situation where the middle class eroded to the point where, in many key, where the flow of money, essentially slows down, they just don't have the money to spend. I think you've got some very serious problems. And, and a feature of this, to go back to the investing in your ability to learn and keeping in sort of a general attitude of constantly learning and reinventing yourself. One of the problems with the people who have been deprived of sort of, the economic boom in certain areas is that they don't have the skills to learn. They don't have the skills to reinvent themselves. And they don't have the attitudes to do so. And, this is a gigantic problem. I don't claim to have a solution, but you're going to be seeing, we're seeing this now on an international level, massive changes in taxation, how tax systems work. I mean, we see this as, you know, I'm sure everybody here is aware of the reform of the rules of international tax right now. You know, where I would strongly advise those of you from India and Sri Lanka to do a better job in getting your share out of this, you know, et cetera. But, you know, it's a big problem, no question. And I think what the pandemic has done is made it far more visible.
Yeah. And, you know, it's often, you know, the rich have the ability to shelter their income, you know, in tax havens, and the middle class doesn't. They pay every penny of tax that they owe to the country, and the taxes increase and their purchasing power goes down.
Well, the problem is the middle class don't have any money, you know, anymore. I mean, I think that's really the problem here, that you know, the discretionary pools of capital or savings or something, you know, are just being rapidly eroded. And this is you know, it's a gigantic problem because politically countries just can't survive indefinitely, you know, under those kinds of conditions.
Yeah. Would either Dr. Ramanaik or Mr. Chitre would like to add to that? Inequality? It's a big topic. We can have a whole conference just on that one topic.
Yes, actually, I am, you know, more than 100% agree with Richardson's explanation. Developing countries, middle class mean, you know, they don't have anything to pay taxes. But you know what most of the developing countries governments are doing, they are, you know, keep adding new taxes, focusing on the middle class. Even it's heavily happening in, you know, Sri Lanka. So new taxes, adding new taxes and creating new taxes, every budget planning, you know, they are because they can, this is the only way they can grab money from the middle class.
Yeah, captive.
Easiest way. So they are increasing the fuel prices every month, increasing the electricity bills. So that is terrible and very, very, you know, bad situation. But I don't think this is happening in all countries, but particularly this is happening in Sri Lanka because of the corrupted political situation.
I assure you, it's happening in Canada.
Oops.
I think that in countries like the United States and Canada, I think that perhaps what you call corruption is probably just less visible. You know, I mean, I would not want the job of running these countries, but you know, I mean, the good thing about democracies, of course, is that there are elections and you can, you know, vote for governments, but that has nothing to do with how the governments behave once they're voted in. And, you know, governments, you know, we go back to talking about the attitude of, you know, success in business. You know, you need that in government as well. And so many politicians think that once they've been elected that the job is done. And the problem is that that's, you know, only the beginning of, you know, of what is a major job. And governments, I think, need to develop the courage to think long term, you know, well beyond, you know, the 4 years or the 5 years of their electoral term. And make no mistake, they play a significant role in developing and nurturing the background, you know, through the way that all of this other stuff rolls out and behaves. I mean, if people are in a political environment where they just don't see they have any opportunity, you know, they have some dead-end job, and the problem is not the dead-end job. The problem is their belief that all they're ever going to have is the dead-end job. You know, that's pretty toxic. That's pretty toxic.
Moving on.
Just
sorry.
one thing sorry, Priya, I would like to add one thing, like importance of good governance also very important. like many of the developing countries, we don't trust our governments. But I would like to share one experience from South Korea, where I spent 9 years there. So people, trust the government. So even during IMF crisis in 1997 and 1998, the government asked people to donate or sell their gold to the banks because the country is in a heavy crisis. So the people trusted and they all sold. If I ask from India or Sri Lanka to, Sri Lankans to sell their gold, never. And also in the subprime mortgage crisis in 2014, I was there at that time. So government request people to stop all the, foreign currencies outflow. They stopped their foreign vacation tours. They stopped sending monies to their, kids or children who live abroad. So people could trust the government, but most of the countries, we can't trust the government because they are keeping lying and doing all the bad things to this country after they got the power.
That's very encouraging. At least there is one country where people do trust their government.
Yeah.
There aren't many like that. Mr. Chidle.
I think the topic is very tempting, but let me just quickly make a few mentions. There was a mention about taxes. Now, normally, there are direct taxes and there are indirect taxes. Now, indirect taxes are very easy to collect. So temptation for any government is to increase the indirect taxes. Direct taxes are difficult to administer and monitor. And therefore, we talked about middle class and so on and so forth, people paying tax, not paying tax. But unless there is a mechanism by which people at large are able to communicate upwards, kind of people who have the income but who do not pay taxes. Now, I'm talking again philosophically. Every one of us stays in whichever place we are, and we know people who have good amount of income but possibly not paying taxes. Now, there's no mechanism of making this work. So I think that's one problem, and therefore, as long as we remain what we are, the problems would continue.
Yeah.
Thinking slightly differently, and on a lighter side, there are normally two kinds of people. I think those who mind do not matter, and there are people who mind do not matter, and there are people who matter but they do not mind. I think the question is that most of us keep saying that we mind, but do we really matter? And I think it's only when these two kinds of populations come together that a country or a government can make a difference. And I think we will have to move on towards that direction. How fast we move on is, I think, the basic question. Thank you.
Thanks. All right. I think we are actually doing this at an educational institution, so we cannot not address the next issue. How has the pandemic affected education sector? Would you like, John, you said you want to talk about it. Mr. Chidle said he wants to talk about it. One of you to start, and then the other one can add as well.
John can start it.
Well, I think that probably all of us could, come up with, 100 different ways that it has. But I'm going to make a very narrow observation in the field I know best, which is, essentially law, right? And once the pandemic started, the way law schools operate in Canada and the United States, they have these live classes and, et cetera, et cetera. So when the pandemic started, all the law schools, the classes went online immediately. And what struck me about it was that, this really, the way I would try to handle it, I would create not law schools, but consortiums of law schools around the world where rather than seeing it as a disadvantage, you could, actually create access to certain other kinds of courses or, or a certain kind of teaching and that sort of stuff. So I think what is clear in the area of education that pandemic has forced people to behave in a way that I think has actually increased the diversity in education, the opportunities for access to education. Now, I don't think it's ever going to displace the very best of the live educational environments. However, I think it's ridiculous to think that all institutions that were operating, in sort of the live environment were doing a particularly good job. So, the pandemic has changed things. What we're doing right now, as you point out, fairly comfortably online in Zoom would not have been going on a few years ago, at least not with this level of comfort. That's here to stay. And the key is, how to leverage that, which, I think at a minimum means giving people the opportunities for a much more global education. And, that is clearly going to be good. You don't have to import teachers from other parts of the world, whatever, anymore. All you have to do is, is make it available in discussion format online. So that's a narrow aspect of this, but I think that it could be extrapolated to broader principles.
This has probably given the opportunity, it has created an opportunity to learn from the best, globally best, for certain, courses. That goes everywhere. Like when you look at, for example, primary and, schools, high schools and stuff like that, and unions, complaining about it, etc. If the schools are able to get the best teachers wherever they are located and have those people teach the students online, it's going to be a different ballgame. Would you like to add something, Mr. Chitle, to education?
Just quickly, 2 or 3 things. Of course, the online education became more popular. That's a natural fallout. But if you look at the basic fundamental of objectives for this, there's a difference between teaching and learning. I think those institutions which have been able to improve the learnings could deliver the teaching better. And I think that's a more fundamental difference, but that's what one has to really count upon. Secondly, most of us talk about quality of education, etc., etc. But quality is always ongoing and moving. And I would define quality mathematically like a performance divided by expectation. If the performance is better than expectation, that means mathematically it is more than 1, I think the quality is maintained. So those who are able to maintain this quality of education, whether in pandemic or otherwise, will always sustain, but not otherwise. And thirdly, I think those of us who happen to be the medium of education, that means the teachers, how often we update ourselves will become very, very important. Once a graduate, a lifetime graduate is true, but once knowledgeable, always knowledgeable is not true. And therefore, I think those teachers who have been able to upgrade themselves, keep up with the opportunities around, expand their own horizons, have been always good teachers. And I would say in the field of education, this becomes very, very important. And since we're talking about business, perseverance, resilience, let me connect these 2 topics together. That how often we find people from education also being involved in the field of business, maybe as directors, maybe as advisors, etc., etc. I think somewhere the goal will have to be that way. The combination of a business and education, I'm not saying convert education into business, but contributing education to the business to make it better, survive, surveil, is I think what the goal should be. And those of us who can acquire the skill to be there will always be, I think, better off. And I think the objective of this kind of a program should be to inculcate that kind of a desire or a habit, that how do I make myself better so that the businesses can survive better, should be, I think, the objective. Thank you.
That is so true. We just earlier talked about people who could transform their skills into what is needed, survived. And I think, teaching that in school is a good way to go about it. Future of work has changed a lot as well. There are going to be some people who will always work from home now. And there are some people who have to go into the office. So how has the future of work changed? And Dr. Ramanayake, you said you would like to talk about that.
Well, actually, in the future of work will be more in, hybrid ways. So even we are now preferring both ways, online education and also the physical education, like physically teaching. So in the future, I think most of the employees would like to work in a, hybrid way. Some part of the work they can handle in home, and another part they can go physically, maybe once or twice a week, once or twice in a week. I think this way is more environmental friendly because we can save a lot of energy, saving time, also the cost of transportation cost, these things. And also in terms of like in the future of work will be more into R&D, research and development, based on the innovation. So that would be the one kind of particular area. A lot of field studies will happen, because we as you mentioned before, we will have more crises and more pandemic in the upcoming centuries. I think we will have more often, not like, once in 20 years or 30 years, because of the environmental pollution and all the, the toxic that we are eating and the toxic that we are providing to the environment, and also the climate change impact. So we have to expect more crisis often. So actually in that case, we should get ready for this kind of environment and get ready and more into the research and development on new innovative technology. Especially we can introduce new machineries like robotics to handle some kind of work, and also increase the mass production with a lot of machineries. And in field of agriculture, we can go with more indoor farming with innovative technologies. At the same time, like, increasing zombie lending, maybe Mr. Richardson is more familiar that, because of the death rate increasing for the most of the countries, then the zombie lending will be increased, particularly like countries like China. So this kind of financial sector, new job will create in the future. And also, I think the switch occupation into the high skill jobs will also will be upcoming trend.
Yeah. Just to give credit about future crisis, it was one of John's statement I borrowed actually. You said there'll be more. There's one certainty: there'll be more crisis, and there will be.
That's true.
Yeah, exactly. Also, I guess the other, like, there were a lot of vulnerabilities that came to the forefront during this pandemic, and one of them being supply chain issues. And we talked about concentration risk because the entire world depended upon one country to supply everything for them. And all of a sudden, the car manufacturers cannot manufacture cars because there are no chips. Computers, all of the issues relating to supply chain also came to the fore. Does anybody want to say anything about supply chain?
Well, actually, I have something to tell, regarding the supply chain. Like, the maritime transportation is a hugely impact during this, pandemic, and that hardly massively impacted in many economies, which is more dependent on the raw materials. So actually, like ready-made garment industries in many developing countries face this supply chain disruptions because they don't have raw materials, especially imported from China, most of the countries. So this could be a big impact in terms of supply chain. So the most of the textile and clothing industries, they have to shut down without the materials. They can't continue the productivity. Also, they had like demand side impact because of the Western countries. They stopped their orders for sometimes, and also they delayed delayed their payment. So that was biggest concentrate in the field of supply chain. And in terms of like ready-made garment industry, I want to focusing more on the job losses. You know, even Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Myanmar, Cambodia, a lot of job losses for the this kind of supply chain industry, because the demand side impact also caused for a shutdown lot of companies, and also the pay cut. Another thing is like the supply chain also generally impacted, because of the most of the workers who worked in the garment sector is female. So when they loses their jobs and they have to stay home without income, so the gender-based violence increased against the female, and a lot of like women poverty increased because of the supply chain. But some countries would able to overcame this kind of supply chain impact. For example, Vietnam also producing a lot of garments, but what they did is they vaccinated first for the workers who worked in the export-based industries, so they could continue their working process. So this kind of strategies can take for into the quickly recover from this kind of impact.
You know, at the beginning of the pandemic, actually, we had a lot of supply chain issues here as well, because a lot of our food and everything comes from America. And, there weren't enough truck drivers, for example. So toilet paper, food, like people were stocking up. Like all of a sudden, people would just, buy too much of it, thinking that it's going to last, and it did. Afterwards, the market was flooded with everything. What time is it there, Mr. Chitle? I don't know what time it is over there. I just want to make sure that I'm cognizant of the time.
It's about 11:30 in the morning. I think we started at 10 o'clock. So we have in a way spent, I think, about 90 minutes totally so far.
Okay, good. All right. So supply chain issues, you talked about people losing jobs and a lot of women losing jobs. Supply chain was an issue also in manufacturing sector, just normal manufacturing sector. The parts didn't come, for automotive companies, etc. The one good thing that came out of this was you might see, I think, as opportunities, forming through that. There is a movement to repair the stuff, not just dispose of, like just throw it away. So it's starting the movement. They want the right to repair the stuff, not the ability to just throw away. So I think that's not a bad thing, not just for the consumer, but also for the climate as well, because it consumes a lot of resources, right? So your refrigerator, something goes wrong, don't throw it away, get it repaired. So that may not be a bad thing that came out of this particular pandemic and supply chain issues. There was some discussion about lack of resources for SMEs, and that was essentially talking about, the access to latest technology as well as access to capital. Mr. Chitle, you said you would like to talk about that because you're experiencing it.
I think from a business angle, and not that I'm doing business, but deal with people who are in the business. This lack of resources, the first problem is many of them do not understand that they lack resources. Because the starting point is that I know everything. And being the boss of the business, where it pushes them is rarely understood. And I think this program being arranged by a Department of Accounting, and I being an accountant, let me make use of that language to some extent over here, first time.
Good.
See, many of these lack the ability to create their own management information system which would tell them from time to time as to what their current position is. So the MIS system, as it is called, which brings to their knowledge where they stand, what do they do, etc., is absolutely essential. I think, unfortunately, some of them do not pay enough attention to this. They are either technically very strong or they're very strong in marketing, so they don't pay attention to the overall activities of the business. I think that's the first point. Secondly, a topic of risk management, which is absolutely important for any business, is not necessarily attended to by the SME businesses. They say, look, I know everything. Where is the question of understanding the risk management? But what are the different types of risk? How to evaluate, how to eliminate, how to take care of those risks are not normally done. Secondly, governance is normally considered to be prerogative of only large businesses. But I think the governance is much more important in SME business. A proprietor who utilizes bank borrowings for his personal use is doing the worst of governance. But I think at some places, people end up doing things like this. So the new talk about ESG being very relevant for business is absolutely essential for SME business. So I would say those SMEs who pay enough attention to these resources are able to find out their own sources from which they can obtain those resources. Because one must first realize that, look, this is where I am lacking. And then comes the question of finding a solution. So first, understanding the problem itself is a problematic. And I think that is where the accounting becomes very, very important, because that accounting would become very relevant to bring them to accountability. The proprietor being accountable to the business is many times lost sight of when it's a SME business. So accounting must bring accountability. And if accountability is brought out, automatically the business will get credibility. I think that's the process which SMEs will have to learn. And I think the pandemic to a great extent pushed them to learn that, because there was no short-term measures available. Many of them were pushed to the wall to such an extent that they had to do this. So I think the sources from which you can get resources are always around. The question is, do I understand what do I need to do? Once I understand that, then I can look around and make my own strategy. Once I make my own strategy, then I follow it with an action. And through the action should come human enrichment. I think it's not only the money which is the objective. If human enrichment is kept the objective by the SMEs, they would always prosper. Those of people who try and restrict the employees' workings, restrict the incomes of the employees, etc., at some point of time do suffer. So I think it's an overall human enrichment that will have to be kept at the back of the mind. And I think that is how I would say those SMEs which could think of in this fashion are able to bounce back quickly. Others may find it longer time till the pandemic gives them a great clearance for the future. Thank you.
So it's a question of processes and culture, like, and you got to do it from day one.
Yeah.
To survive. Do you want to say anything about that, Dr. Ramnaike or John? Or
I don't have anything particularly to add. I thought that what he said was right on, made a lot of sense.
yeah.
Maybe
Yes.
I would like to add a couple of things, like focusing on the developing countries, not like only, follow the trends, all the developing countries, labor intensive, textile producing countries, not only producing apparels. Some countries, they are extremely good at, like Bangladesh and Myanmar or Cambodia. So let them the opportunity, and others, they can, try to shift into some kind of product cycle, new product cycles, not only the same cycle that follow in and that is not successful for a long time. So shifting is needed, I think. And also the one important point I want to mention, like, which is again the East Asian countries, particularly South Korea and Taiwan, when they are having a rapid economic growth, they invited the joint ventures, not the foreign direct investment. That is only the joint venture companies. So they came to the Korea, and especially from Japan and US, they had to joint venture with the local companies. So that is not only investing, but learning the process and the learning technology from the advanced country. So I think developing countries pay attention on these kind of strategies. We are accepting just in that investment, and they are investing these investment on mainly the infrastructure, but no production. And if we don't have production, what we can export and how we earn money? So that is the struggling point. And we are producing the same product, apparels, and the market is flood of apparel. We can't compete in terms of quality and the quantity as well. So, and also not depending on in terms of raw materials or the resources in a particular country. Most of us depend on China. We have to depend on more regionalized, we can depend more on India and Bangladesh and near countries, and East Asian countries more depend on Thailand or Vietnam or Myanmar. In North America, they can more rely on the South American countries like this.
I wanted to touch upon, we talked about technology resource, for example. This world now, it is enabled by technology, right? So no matter where you go now, you're even looking at agriculture, for example, and robotics and stuff. But I think related to technology, there's an issue of attracting the best talent. And that's the next generation. So people of my generation, knew how to work with older technology or lack of it. But I think the next generation doesn't know how to work without technology. So if you want to attract the best and the brightest to your business, you have to make that investment. And then you're going to get, new people coming in, seeding your business with some new ideas, better ways of doing things, and, preparing you and your business for the future. So it's an important aspect of that. There was some there was some discussion about increased demand. We saw some sectors of the economy saw reduced demand. And some of that by choice, and some of that by force. For example, cutting hair. I have been cutting my own hair. So because, the salons were closed. So I was forced to, invent a way to deal with my own hair. But so that there are some sectors, but there are other sectors you've seen increased demands, the auto sector, you've seen increased demand in electronics and stuff. So what is driving that? Does anybody have any thought on that?
Just a practical example, at least in India, Chitalier, in India, in large cities, where the work from home is becoming a better practice or more acceptable proposition, people who are staying in one-room house tried to shift to two-room houses. People who are staying in two-room houses tried to shift to three-room houses. So at least in this period, we are seeing increase in demand for some of the builders who could deliver quality homes. Now, this was completely unexpected because the money supply is not increasing. So they expect increase in housing demand was not very common. But the fact that technology and pandemic pushed people to work from home, pushed them to look at their own houses, where the children and the parents both are going to be staying in the house and doing their education and business. Naturally, then 1 room, 2 room, 3 room, whatever they had was not found to be sufficient. So everyone tried to move slightly, subject to, of course, what the pocket permits them. But I think that was a different kind of an increase in demand. I do not know how long this will sustain. But in the last 6 months to 1 year, we have seen that in major cities, a change in expectations. Thank you.
You know, on that point, in Toronto, where I live, you know, people deliver flyers, you know, for services and that. And I've been getting an increasing number of flyers from renovators who claim to specialize in converting parts of houses to home offices and that sort of thing, or converting attics or basements or something to home offices. So, you know, that's one thing. A second thing is that there, at least, you know, the experience in Toronto, Canada has been a lot of people are just moving out of the city now because they can get bigger houses and more space. And the price discrepancy between housing in Toronto, you know, it's always higher in urban centers. And, you know, a couple of hours outside the city is, you know, I mean, they're coming together. I mean, you can't pick up these houses outside Toronto anymore for, you know, significant discounts to the city. So we're seeing, you know, I mean, it's just natural. It's a change in the way people are working. But then the question becomes, well, you know, how does the change in their work impact their living space and all those kinds of things? So it's really just, you know, a readjustment of what the world looks like.
Yeah. So with that, here to a better future, better work environment, better education, I want to thank the panelists, all of you, for sharing your insights, wisdom, and some guidance for the audience. And I learned a lot from just listening to all of you. And I thank you for that. With that, I would pass the baton to the next person. Swapnil Chenvi? Yeah.
I will now request my colleague CS Swapnil Chenvi to handle the Q&A session. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, madam. It was a thoroughly enriching session, and I'm sure that the members of the audience have liked the entire first half. The members of the audience have also been asking a lot of questions in the YouTube chat box, as well as we have created a separate WhatsApp group wherein the questions have been pouring in. So we have selected a few questions, reframed and refined those questions so that the panelists can answer a selected few questions in the next 10-15 minutes. So the questions are open to all the three panelists and the moderator. The first question that I have come across in the YouTube chat box was, there have been limited resources in during the last 2 years. And one of the panelists also said that the sources to get resources are around. We just have to have an eye to see it. So if there are limited resources, what should the focus of an organization be to maximize those the benefits from those resources, or to stabilize their organization for the long run? So the viewpoint may differ from person to person, but what should the opinion be, whether to focus on the short run or the long run? Yeah, anybody from the panelists?
I think Mr. Chitle addressed that question. So anyway, I'm just going to stand back. So go ahead.
Okay, I think very quick. I already taken a lot of air time, so let me not take more. But very quickly, I think anyone who wants to business and who wants to be in business will have to keep running. So any short-term solutions are never good. However, it does not mean that one can forget the short term and keep on looking at the long term. It's a combination of two factors which happen. Whatever resources I have today, I must know how to keep them using properly. But I must do the elasticity of the rubber to such an extent that I keep on looking at tomorrow and day after tomorrow and keep on increasing the resources. I think those of us who remain satisfied with what is there today over a period of time will not be able to sustain the competition which is around us. And every next generation is going to compete with you more fiercely and more forcibly. So therefore, one will have to keep on doing a combination of a short term, that means using your resources in the best possible manner, but still keep on expanding, looking at things which can be better tomorrow. I think that's the way I will look at it.
I would like to add a very quick thing into the question. The South Korea is zero natural resources. They only had the human capital, human resources. So they could succeed through the human resources. So if you know how to manage the human resources well, I think the resources is not the problem.
Right. Actually, that gets me to the next point, actually, since we're talking about human resources. Many people have lost their jobs in the recent past. Though we are slowly creeping back to normalcy, but then many people have still not got any jobs. So how do you address this insecurity amongst the employees? How do you manage the insecurity? Because every time the employee goes back to the organization, the employee will have at his or her back of the mind that I may be removed the next time there is a pandemic or there is an uncertainty. So how do you address this insecurity?
Can I say something?
Yes, madam, please.
I think one thing to do, first of all, any employee, it's just like any business. You have to make yourself indispensable. So if you're skilled, you're very good at what you do, you have a good attitude, you probably will be kept. In case you are not, if you lose your job, you're going to be in demand. It's going to be fairly easy for you to find a job. In other words, don't get too comfortable and just do nothing. I'm just, these are my skills and I'm not going to improve that. That's it. Don't do that. Constant upgrade and make yourself indispensable.
Well,
Now,
I'd like to offer something on that as I listen to your question and the answers. I don't think that if somebody goes to a job every day that they're afraid of losing, I don't think they should be in that job. I think they should leave and find something else, no matter what the cost. And there's two reasons for that. The first is that nobody can live under that kind of anxiety. But secondly, you know what? All of life is competitive. It doesn't matter what it is. And if you're afraid of losing the job, it's probably a comparative thing. It probably means you don't like the job as well as the people who are less likely to lose the job. And, life is too short to be in that kind of environment. I think it should be a signal to really work hard on reinvention, because the worst thing would be to not lose that job and to live with the fear every day of losing it. That would be the worst of all possible outcomes, I think.
And also, I would like to add the same thing which Priya has mentioned. The upgrading is not only related to the person, as an industry. To sustain in long time, upgrading in the industry and also introduce this new industry is also important. Upgrading at the same time, introduce new industries. So then we are able to sustain in long run.
Absolutely.
Talking about what John was talking about, leave their job. That is why in North America, we've had this great resignation. People leaving jobs. They're saying, I don't like this job. There are other things which are important in my life. I quit. So there are lots of jobs available. And people are having difficulty finding workers in North America. So I think sometimes, no matter where you are, human resource is a resource. It's an important aspect of your business. If you don't have good people, you're not going to succeed. So even employers have to be cognizant of that to retain the good people.
Yes, right. We agree with you on that point. And one more question before we wind up with this Q&A session. One of the participants has asked about ESG model. We've been discussing about it in the last 1.5 hours. ESG model has gained a lot of importance in the recent days, but probably the ESG model has gained an importance in the Western world. What about India? This, if CA Shri Mukund Chitle can answer, how can we promote this concept in our country? It is still a new concept in India, though it has been prominent in the Western parts of the world. So whether should it be voluntary or should it be a mandate for every company that ESG model has to be followed? How do we go about it in our country?
See, there are always concepts which keep coming. Sometimes they come from India, sometimes they come from abroad. So ESG is a concept. As of today, within our country, SEBI has pushed it to all large corporates. So all large corporates have started looking at ESG, environment, social, and governance. Now, governance as such was already there in the form of what is known as corporate governance, part of SEBI regulations, etc., for a long time. ESG, all major companies have formed their own companies, which are normally a committee of the board, and start doing that. So I think at a very high level, I would say that the government through the SEBI is already pushing it. The next point is, normally all good things are stated to be good for somebody else and not for me. That's the human psychology. So if we say ESG is good, wherever we are working, are we looking at ESG? A simple thing like cleanliness in whatever organization we are working, governance in whatever organization we are working. So I think it's always easier to put questions, but it is always difficult to ask, find out your own answers. So I would say in that direction, the countries, within India, companies are moving. They are finding their own ways of doing things. But I think it's only the contribution of people and participation of people which can make it happen. And for that, we don't have to depend upon the companies or the government. It's a social movement. Wherever we are staying, are we maintaining environment? Are we maintaining cleanliness? I think the answers are yes. We don't have to look to somebody else to do it for us. I would say it has to be more of a social movement than a government movement. I believe that slowly it should start happening. Let's hope for that. Thank you.
I think the S part of ESG is becoming quite important. Even here too, in America, after George Floyd killing, for example, all of a sudden social issues that got exacerbated during the pandemic, the Black unemployment and, the wealth gap between the Blacks and the whites. So even if we don't have racial issues in India, there are inequality issues. Women's participation, Sadika talked about a lot of women having lost jobs, especially if they are in, female-centric businesses. So that social aspect is going to become quite important. Environment is important no matter what. It's for the entire world, but also the S part is going to become important.
So it has to be a collective effort from everybody, not just the government, but also from the societal persons. So yeah, on that note, I would like to conclude with our Q&A session. It was a very good session in the last 2 hours. And so I would now request our Vice Principal and IQAC Coordinator, Ms. Chandana Chakraborty, to propose the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Swapnil. And it's still good morning because there's still 2 minutes for the noon. So good morning to all. And I'm indeed fortunate to be conferred this honor of proposing a vote of thanks for today's very, very, I should say, enriching, enlightening discussion that we have had on the topic of evolving business perseverance and resilience to sail and thrive through pandemics and other global crises. I would first and foremost like to extend my thanks to our moderator come speaker for today's session, Priya Patil. Madam, thank you. You were like our, you were like a captain for the ship. You were steering the conversation through so many relevant topics, and giving a direction to this entire session that we have had and made it so very meaningful. And I know that we are across continents and the time zone difference is there. So it is not the best of the time for you, but you have spared your valuable time and made it very, very meaningful discussion that we have had today. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you from the bottom of my heart.
My pleasure.
Thank you. I'm now going to follow a very simple thing that we have been doing for so many years. Being a woman myself, I'll always follow the principle of women first. So my next thanks is due to Dr. Sanika Sulochani Ramanayake. Madam, you are an expert, and your insights that you have given across countries.
I'm not an expert.
But then whatever you have, your knowledge that you have shared with us of countries, you have given examples from Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, South Korea, China, Vietnam. These are what I think carries a lot of weightage. Students, and even we are students, because we are also learning so many things. So they are definitely, benefited from your viewpoints, your experience. We could see a lot of points. It became much more clearer for us. Thank you, ma'am, for sparing your valuable time.
Thank you very much.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. John Richardson. You have also spared, you are also in a different time zone. So thank you first and foremost for, removing out the time, sparing the time for us. And you have also given your inputs on the scenario of developed countries, many of which we are very often not being directly exposed to. So you gave your insight on those aspects. Especially, I was very much being in the field of education. Priya ma'am's question on the education system, I found that discussion very, very enriching. And last but not the least, finally, I am extremely thankful to our very own, I will say, CA M.M. Chitare sir, the director and member of our governing body of Parle Tilak Vidyalaya Association. He has been like a guardian angel for us. He has guided us, not today alone, for a number of days. He has been very forthcoming with valuable suggestions, which we have tried to incorporate. And his inputs today also has been significant. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. I'm sure everybody here, all of us, would agree that an activity like what we had today wouldn't have been possible, like as you have yourself said, that human resource is the most important resource. And we also are fortunate enough to have such type of valuable human resource in the form of hard work and endless hours, which has been put in by this organizing committee, headed by a convener, Shri Munesh Save, and his entire team of dedicated teachers who are, managing their teaching workload and at the same time finding time for all these activities and coordinating the various activities. So I'm thankful to Dr. Sahifa, Ms. Pallavi, Mr. Samrat, Mr. Shuddhodhan, and Dr. Siddhi, as well as our technical support, which was, I should say, the lifeline of this entire conference, CS Swapnil. So I'm thankful to all of you who have worked very hard for this e-conference to take place. I'm also thankful to all the paper presenters from across who have come forward and submitted their papers, which is going to be, some of them are going to be presented in the next session. So they will have the opportunity for paper presentation and deliberations at that time. So we are very thankful to these paper presenters as well. And last, but the most important, I am extremely grateful to our very young audience who have attended this entire session, because we can plan many things. We can put in a lot of hard work, but nothing would be meaningful without having this audience who are, the recipients of this type of deliberations that we have had. Thank you to all for making this e-conference happen. And thanks on behalf of M.L.Dahanukar College of Commerce, Parle Tilak Vidyalaya Association's M.L.Dahanukar College of Commerce. Thank you so much. Over to you, Swapni.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks to all.
Thank you, madam. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you, Principal. See you.
Yeah.
And
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Bye.
Thank
Thank
you,
you
everybody.
very
Thank you,
much.
sir.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Even
And now
we
We
got
can
the
say good night
opportunity
to
to
Priya and John, I think.
we got the opportunity to listen Mr. Chitale at a length first time.
Yeah, he's a very busy person.
Thank
I
you.
think
It's
now
one-
we can say good night to Priya and John.
It's
Yes.
1:30 in the morning. I'm going to go hit the bed now.
Correct.
Good night.
Good
Good
night.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Bye.
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 And now request the members of the audience to proceed for the lunch break. We will resume the post-lunch session at 1:30 p.m. An email containing the joining link for the technical session will be sent to all the participants in the next 10 minutes. All are requested to join the session at sharp 1:30 p.m. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am.